Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us.
Welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. We are going to be joined by a guest of the podcast, Jake Williams, and I'm excited about the conversation because we're really going to dive more into physical security and how to protect organizations and people and what that looks like when we compare it against the cybersecurity landscape. So looking forward to having this conversation with Jake and just kind of want to give a little bit of an overview of his background. He is a veteran and was in the Navy for 13 years and was a SEAL. And then after that time, he ended up working in real estate and doing some construction management before he ended up founding Fortified Risk Group, who provides physical and cybersecurity services to help protect individuals and prioritize their safety.
Yeah, really distinguished career up to this point. Obviously, I'm sure there's a lot he can't talk about with his time in the Navy, but over 13 years in the Navy, some of which involve the SEALs. You got to imagine he's got some stories that he can't tell us that we would love to hear. But I'm sure, looking at how these things occurred, that view of somebody whose job was to do special forces, to go in and do the things that everyone wanted to stop them from doing, and they were the team that could get around those defenses, as we've talked about with penetration testing and the need to think like an adversary so that you can stop them, is going to be critical for the things he's doing to help protect companies and individuals in their both physical and digital lives. And I think it's really showing in the success the company's been having.
Yeah, without further ado, I think we should bring Jake on and hear from him firsthand.
And we're back with Jake. Jake, you want to give a quick intro to yourself so everybody can kind of see and hear you?
Yeah, Jake Williams, one of the co-founders with Fortified Risk Group. We're a private security company. We do a lot of consulting for high net worth individuals, corporations, just looking for unique solutions. So we bring a digital and physical security solution to clients all across the U.S.
Yeah, and obviously the physical we've talked a lot about in our show in the past that can't be ignored. We talk about pen testers and stuff like that. Your digital security is only as good as the physical security is, and vice versa. So, not going to be kind of quite as strict to cybersecurity this time around, but they all intermingle. And so we really appreciate you joining us, Jake.
Thanks for having me.
Looking at all that you've been doing, one of the favorite things I found on your guys' website that I really want to kind of kick off the conversation with is, every partnership starts with a threat assessment. I really love that generically, not least of which is specifically in what you're doing when it comes to, your whole job is assessing and dealing with those threats. But I think this is important with any relationship, any partnership. I love the fact you use it as a partnership, not as part of client onboarding. We run to make sure that we understand all of your threats. So being able to pull that stuff in that regard, that, you're working together, there's an equalness between you and your clients. And here I am using those old terminology there.
Yeah.
But I really like that. So maybe give us a little bit of that philosophical piece of things and how that fits into kind of what you all do day in and day out.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It really is. Everything for us starts with a threat assessment. And when my business partner and I, Robin, we set out to start this company, we really just had like one mission in mind. We said, let's provide real security solutions for those that are just tired with status quo. We really found that people were like, they weren't looking for like, let me just check a box or let me find what's good enough. They had real threats. They wanted real protection on both physical and digital side of the house. And we looked into our experience in the military and in the SEAL teams. And we said, how did we find success in all the different operations and that we did not only ourselves, but also just as a community. And for us, it always came down to our process of targeting the enemy. And so it was this intelligence gathering process, analyze the information, figure out the pattern of life. And then from there, we would hit them where they're most vulnerable. And so we said, we can come in, reverse engineer that process that's so tried and true. It's worked for decades, centuries more. And then we'll look at it. But now, rather than attacking our client, we're on the same side. We're in that partnership, and we put on those lenses that we're so used to wearing and say, this is how you guys are going to be exploited. This is how you're going to be attacked. So we do that threat assessment. We identify those vulnerabilities ahead of time with forward planning. And then from there, we take that assessment and we say, now we can develop a roadmap to make sure physical, digital, everything's integrated, and you're now at a much more secure position. It's kind of like if you go to the doctor and the doctor, your right ankle's hurting, and the doctor just says, hey, I'm gonna give you a brace for your left shoulder. Like, shouldn't you check me out first and like do an assessment, right? And see how I'm feeling, and do range of motion and all these different things so that the right diagnosis is given for whatever my illness is or whatever my injury is. And that's really how we've looked at it here. The industry, you have a threat and you need to assess that threat and then mitigate it appropriately.
What does the typical threat assessment look like? Is it different for every client based on their needs, or do you kind of have like a standardized approach for what that looks like when you're kind of assessing what that particular client needs?
We have a framework that leads us through every client interaction, but at the same time, there is no cookie cutter solution for us, because one week we may be working with a large manufacturing facility, and another week we may be working with a media company, and the next week we're working with a big attorney group. And so the framework guides us similarly, but as far as like what the nuts and bolts look like, that changes based on their company outlay and their structure and everything. So, but ultimately what it looks like is on the physical side, we're putting actual boots on the ground. Team members of ours are going to their location or locations. They're assessing the physical infrastructure. We're getting the environment where we're actually, like I said, putting boots on the ground to assess all that, working closely with them to understand the interoperating procedures of the facility. And then at the same time, we also have a team running the digital side of things, looking at where, what is their exposure online, what type of systems they have in place for their executives that may or may not make them more vulnerable. Can I just find out where their CEO lives or their C-suite lives? All of that is combined, and then we were able to put that assessment together, and we actually generate a score off of that. So every single assessment we do, you get a quantifiable score, 0 to 100, based on an objective matrix that we use. Then when you actually get this, you can say, okay, we scored, let's call it a 78. We want to get to a 98, or we want to get to 100. Here are the steps you need to do so that you can get to 100.
Yeah, I love that. Both you need a guide on how to get from A to B. You need to know where you are first. But a lot of what you're talking about, obviously some of it is the digital side of it, but we have these conversations in cybersecurity all the time. It's penetration testing, pay somebody to try and break into your facility, and that's the best way to know whether you can get broken into or not.
Yeah.
The OSINT side of things, the open source intelligence gathering, like what can you gather without ever talking to the person, without, just doing, it's Google stalking is, you can learn so much information about people by simple Google stalking them.
Yeah.
And I think those of us of this age range probably do that. Like, hey, this person from high school popped into my mind. I haven't seen or heard anything about them in 15, 20 years. Let's go Google them and figure out what they're up to these days. And you can learn a lot about somebody in that regard.
You can. And we keep a whole team dedicated to OSINT, or open source intelligence, for both our threat assessments and for our clients that we work with regularly, because we want to continue to monitor those types of things. If we have clients with high profiles, whether it's the brand itself or the people within the organization, we can constantly monitor that and tell them, hey, you guys, did you know that you're posting you're going on vacation and your house is vacant right now? Or did you know that you're posting like your next board meeting is here, or you're posting like the Christmas party is here, and it's everyone knows? Just things like that, so we can stay proactive.
Yeah, those things that make us as groups of people, I hesitate to say full-on corporations, but as groups of people that make us seem more human. Once I started looking about open source intelligence, as I started, doing my own Google stalking of people, I don't want any of this out there. I was fortunate that I didn't ever really post much about my kids when they were younger. And once I realized how risky it would be to do that, I would thank my lucky stars that I never did any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think also organizations have prioritized physical security so much less in the more like remote culture. So I do think it's great too that, especially as teams are probably like returning to office and everything, that they're shining a light on that again about making sure that they're keeping their employees safe again, because I think that's something that a lot of companies have probably been relatively lax on. Like I know a lot of like auditors have stopped going on site to like evaluate physical security controls and see like are people still badging in and stuff like that. So I think it's great that your team is focusing on that, because I think that's probably an area from like a physical security control that has probably gone like unaudited for a couple years at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an excellent point. And it is. And oftentimes it's just human nature, but we justify in our minds that if nothing has happened, nothing bad has happened, that nothing bad will happen. And that's something that we just work with our clients on all the time. And we just have to remember that it all it takes is a split second and everything changes. And so we like to, it's complacency or the lack thereof. And it's like, just because nothing's happened doesn't mean nothing will happen.
So as you approach these assessments and even the ongoing aspect of it, obviously physical security, digital security, two very different things, one of which we as a species have been doing for millennia, the physical security side of things. So, when you look at human society, you see, this group of people organize themselves in this way, and that's generally for some level of security, to protect themselves from another group of people, to protect themselves from wild animals that might try to attack and take them down. So we've been doing that. We've had many, many, many years of learning how to keep ourselves physically secure. Digital, on the other hand, is something that really in our lifetimes is not something that people considered early on, because most people didn't have a digital life back in 70s, 80s, 90s. So from your perspective, as you try to help these people, both physical and digital, like what lessons do you learn from those many, many years of physical security that you can then apply to that digital realm to make sure that they stay safe in both?
I think the best way I normally explain it, and it makes sense for us because, like you said, Brian, we've been doing this for centuries. It's in our physical side of things. Digital security and physical security are similar in the sense that if someone wants in bad enough, they can get in, right? Meaning you can have the most secure physical vault in the world, but if the right person has the right motivation and mindset, they're going to find a way to get into that thing.
It's like water around your foundation. Like
Totally.
if it sits there long enough, it'll find a way in.
Totally. And I remind people with that on the digital side, I just remind them it's the same concept. And you can usually visualize that, whether it's something as simple as that we use on a regular basis, like passwords, or something more complex with VPNs or firewalls or whatever the case may be. If there's an adversary out there that wants whatever you have behind those walls bad enough, they'll find a way. We have to do everything we can, both physically and digitally, to both have detection measures in place, but have deterrence measures in place. Make it as challenging as possible. And these are blanket statements I make for both digital and physical. Make it as challenging as possible so that, one, if it's not a direct target against you, they look at your profile and they say, that is too much of a hardened target. I'll go on to the next. Really set yourself up for success. So, and again, you can usually, especially for generations, depending on the age group you're working with, some people, they know it already. They understand the difference. If I'm working with an age group that doesn't understand as much, using that physical analogy tends to really help.
Do you find a lot of differences in the physical versus digital side of things with age ranges? I don't necessarily want you to call out any particular age ranges, but is that a legit thing that you see on a regular basis?
It does. I do. And I won't like, one, I don't have any data in front of me. So most of it's anecdotal based just from what we've done, but I could quantify it a bit more over time. It of course depends on the industry. It depends on the job title and profession and what individuals' experience are. But just in general, there's the older generations that have not spent, again, this is more of a general statement, of course, but that have not spent as much time on the tech side, don't understand the vulnerabilities that the digital has. And that's why, unfortunately, you see these digital scammers go after the older demographics, because it's an easier target. Like, oh, this is something that we see somewhat regularly with some of our clients that are maybe in that age bracket. They'll get these spam emails. Oh, you spent $1,000 on PayPal. If you didn't do this, call now and get your money back. And they call and boom, $1,000 is gone or $2,500 is gone. And I know to us, it probably sounds like a much more basic example, but it's like, well, my front door was locked and my bank wasn't robbed, and I keep my money in my mattress. So anyway, all that to say, in that side, I think there's a much bigger vulnerability.
When looking and having those conversations, obviously you need to have both the physical security and the digital security conversation.
Right.
Do they tend to work best when you have them together, or do you kind of have to separate them? It's like, okay, let's talk about your physical. Once you're done talking about that, let's talk about your digital. Like, do they go together, or do you try to keep them separate?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. They have to go together. In my opinion, they have to go together. That being said, there does have to be an understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of each. Again, we work with a wide variety of clients, but on our corporate side, on the higher end side, usually there's a very competent digital team, and on the other side, there's a very competent physical team. Well, what we can do is help bridge that gap, where we say, hey, you guys are a little bit siloed. Like, did you know that this is happening on the digital side and this is happening on the physical side? And so we like to bridge that gap. If it's another scenario, if we're dealing with someone that owns multiple homes, they have their primary residence and then their secondary homes or vacation homes kind of spread around, we'll ask them, like, what type of systems do you have in place, both physically and digitally, that are protecting these homes? And then we can explain to them how to integrate your locks, integrate your cameras, integrate your alarm systems with all of the physical stuff as well.
When considering their threat assessment and the people that they keep around them, we in cybersecurity oftentimes talk about people being the weakest links.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily like that phrasing, but it unfortunately is hard to ignore that. We click on that link and that's how they get in. I actually typed out the words that too many conversations start with, and they clicked a link.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's very similar in the physical realm. Like, if you have risky individuals around somebody you're trying to protect, you need to identify who they are, figure out what risks they introduce, because it's not just my risks. It's, hey, Milu's a close friend of mine. She introduced risks to me as an avenue to get to me. I guess, how do you go about that piece of things? Because I think that is, as we hire people into our organizations, they become a risk, both physically and virtually or digitally, into our environment. So I'm curious how you go about that.
Yeah, there's a few things I think to unpack there. One thing you're identifying that we've talked about is like a target vector, in the sense that if I put on my old hat and we're targeting an individual or an organization, and I say I want to get to the CEO, and maybe I look at that CEO and I say, well, they have a pretty robust network of physical and digital security around them. So let me look at like one tier down, and I start looking and I say, oh, the executive assistant has a lot of access, has a lot of information, and doesn't have security. So maybe I would start social engineering on that, right? And I start figuring out, okay, what is the pattern of life of that executive assistant? What are they broadcasting? Where are they going? Those types of things. And so that would be an example of a target vector. In your example of Milu talking about, maybe, she's a friend of yours. And so during our assessment, those are things we're looking at. Okay, maybe you have a robust profile around the C-suite, but are there drawbridges down in your castle, so to speak, that would just still allow people right in? You've got these amazing walls and you've got the moat and everything, but the drawbridge is down. So those are things that we work with on clients on a regular basis. Because you smiled when I said executive assistant, and anyone listening to this that is in that world knows, like, oh yeah, they have everything. So
yeah, they have the keys to the castle.
They have the keys.
I know when my dad retired, he like literally didn't know certain things about like passwords and stuff like that, because like she knew everything.
Yeah, exactly. So on that front, it is looking and analyzing those other positions that are just one degree of separation from the target, whatever that objective may be. And that's one. And then remind me the second part of your question there.
Really comes into the how do you assess who those people are that might be around them, and how do you identify those? And I guess I'll extend the question a little bit more and talk about how you how you address it with that person. Like, hey, this executive assistant you have here is really risky.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not always the most comfortable conversation.
Yeah. So it goes back to that process from the beginning of this conversation where we do that analysis. We're looking at the pattern of life of that. That's a term that we would use in our old lives when we've carried it over to today. But we look at the pattern of life. Humans are creatures of habit. And so we start to identify these patterns in our assessments. And it's like, we see you always arrive at this time and you always depart at this time. Or on Mondays and Wednesdays, you do this. And on Thursdays and Fridays, you do that. So we see these predictability patterns starting to take shape. But we notice that, but our assessments will detect that on the rest of the organization in those spheres of influence or in those immediate connections. And so while we're watching that, we might say, yeah, the security team is with the executive the entire time. They have a robust IT department around him as well. So the chance of getting him directly isn't. So go to the next ring. Okay, the executive assistant, we see this and that. It's not every time. And there's other positions too that we'll find these vulnerabilities in. And then it's just part of our assessment. Like, we are going to be brutally transparent and brutally honest because that's what they hired us for. They hire us because they want the truth. If we sugarcoat it, we're not doing anyone a favor. And so sometimes the assessments are, I mean, it's a look under the hood of the car, and sometimes it doesn't look good, right? But the good news is we give them a path to fixing it. So to your question, Brian, like, how do you have that conversation about the executive assistant, whoever the case, whoever, however many people that might be? It comes to, like, we'll provide a list of solutions. We can train them. We can put additional measures in place on their pattern of life. We can work with your IT department to make sure all of that is everything. All that to say, we will work with them to shore those things up. If you remember the movie Zero Dark 30, and there's been some documentaries that came out on the Osama bin Laden raid.
Mm-hmm.
It was the courier, right? It was the guy that was bringing the messages back and forth that ultimately gave up the position. And so that's what we'll find in an organization.
Yeah, I always find that wild. I mean, you hit on the classic example of the weakest link.
Exactly.
It may be the lowest person in the organization, but if they have access at that level, then that can happen.
Yep.
Yeah, when you talk about training for the team members, what type of training does that entail? Is that very much being like mindful of potential vulnerabilities within their system, or also thinking about like how do they spot threatening people? Like, what types of trainings does your team do with team members?
We have a handful of different classes that we put on. One that we normally start with, and this applies to everybody we work with, and it's just we call it situational awareness training. And so it transcends physical and digital because it becomes a mindset. And it's just, ultimately, it's stay engaged. It's stay engaged in what you're doing, stay engaged in what you're working on. It's everything from if you find yourself in a catastrophic active shooter type scenario, all the way to just walking through the parking lot from the grocery store to your car. All these transition points we find ourselves are so vulnerable. And something that we advocate is called the OODA loop. It's a military law enforcement term. It was coined by Colonel John Boyd. He's considered the father of the F-16 fighter jet. And he was an ace when he flew jets. And then he also was an instructor. And what he noticed was the pilots that win dogfights are the ones that go through this loop the fastest. It's observe, orient, decide, and act. Some people, when I get a raise of hands, and I have people give me a show of hands like, who's heard of this today? I get about 25% of the room have started to hear about the OODA loop. I think it's become more mainstream. But what it does is it just says, like, I observe my environment I'm in, I orient myself to that threat, and then I make a decision, and then I act. And so with pilots, fighter pilots, arguably the most physically dynamic environment you can find yourself in, getting shot at from all these different directions, he just said, you got to do that. So this is the really long answer to your question on that. If you find yourself in an active shooter situation, or you find yourself walking across the parking lot, you got to stay engaged. Don't expect anyone else is going to be the one to like step in for you and save the day. Like, we really push to like all levels of the organization. Like, you're responsible for the actions you take. And then after that, it opens up the aperture of everyone we work with. And then you can start to talk about, okay, now that you understand what it is to be engaged and you understand what it is to make a decision, and whether it be a benign environment or something more hostile, now let's talk about your job function and let's talk about your pattern of life. and where some of the vulnerabilities may exist. And that's usually how we step it in, and it is received. Our clients typically really like that.
I like that, the stay engaged. Obviously, in the cybersecurity and infosec space, I feel like that echoes a lot of like what compliance trainings are trying to train people when they're like, hey, if you do get a malicious link, or like, oh, you got a fishy email, like
Yeah.
being aware and like slowing down and taking a minute
Yeah.
to think through, like, is this a legitimate thing? I think echoes for me of being like, oh, this is a similar fact pattern, obviously much less risky, but does potentially expose an organization to their worst nightmare of a data breach or, a cyber event. So it definitely rings true to our audience as well, of just being like, hey, that staying engaged and not letting your work stress cloud your judgment and acting too quickly and making sure you're making the right call, or at least, reporting it if you, do something wrong, is really important.
Ironically, as we record this, I just worked on releasing the episode that Milo and I did about phishing. And that was one of the big takeaways for that episode was just don't go through things quickly. Don't ever just blindly click on a link. You got to think about every click that you have. So it's kind of ironic that bringing that up here.
Yeah, definitely. The OODA loop, it works. You just have to, again, be aware of the environment you're working in, orient yourself to that threat or where it may come from, and then make a decision and act. And sometimes that decision is report as phishing or report as spam.
Yeah. And making that ability to report as easy as possible.
That's right.
So I guess I'll turn that into a question around, as you're training these organizations on how to be more secure, and as we talk about this, being engaged and paying attention and the importance of reporting something suspicious. I'm not a huge fan of the see something, say something approach, because and my daughter just got done reading 1984 today. So there's the parallels there kind of freak me out sometimes.
Yeah.
But it is important to make sure that your security team knows that, hey, there's a coordinated phishing campaign going on, and they only know that because I clicked that link. So that's a digital example that I think we're all getting very familiar with. From the physical perspective, is there something similar to that you help organizations kind of put into place?
Yeah, absolutely. On that side, like on the physical side, we have clients who have undisclosed locations, or they're private facilities. And so we get what we call like probing attempts. And it's similar. It's like to a phishing, where it's just like, hey, I'm going to go out and see if I can hook something here. And so we spend a lot of time not only training our agents that are protecting these facilities on how to deal with various probes or physical phishing like that. We also work with the HR departments to help protect that as well, and build that into the physical training. It's part of their onboarding. It's part of their quarterly training as well, as just kind of refresher on that type of thing. And so much of it just comes back to training and doing the proper repetitions, right? It's just like a principle in life where we know that if we had this saying, prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. Just meaning like if there's been some awareness and there's been some training and there's been repetition, when it presents itself to you, whether it's digital, whether it's physical, your ability to respond appropriately just goes up significantly.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Well, Jake, we really appreciate you kind of just walking us through what your team does and, what you're passionate about. It is a fascinating topic. And as much as we've definitely focused on the cyber element, I actually think we haven't really focused on physical security as much. So it was definitely really great to kind of get that lens. Speaking, I guess, kind of more on the digital realm, I know your team definitely does some work also on deletions, for somebody's digital footprint, which is a really hard thing to do if somebody has a reason, that their background or their information needs to be clawed back. So I guess kind of in that spirit, a couple of years ago, I had a CTO say that he felt like the fight for privacy was dead, and that now it was really the fight for security, and that organizations really needed to really only focus on security and less so about privacy. I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really, I think, interesting question, and it's incredibly important. Our privacy is important, the security is important, and there's always going to be a balance between them. One thing that we talk about a lot is security over convenience, or convenience over security, right? If you're super secure, you usually have very little convenience, and if you're very convenient, you probably have little to no security. And
security is the Department of No.
The Department of No, right? And in my old life, we used to say, like, if it's speed over security or security over speed. And so if we had something we had to do very fast, we probably wore, like physically, we would wear maybe less protection, less physical protection. But if it was something where we weren't going to move as fast, we're going to have more physical protection on. So it's on that organization and on that group of people, whatever it is, to understand their priorities and then find that proper balance. If things are way too convenient, you're probably wildly insecure. And if it's not convenient enough, maybe things need to be dialed back. Maybe they don't. And so to answer the question on privacy versus security, I think we live in this world where the way we're connected today is amazing, but it's also can be catastrophic. It's just such a double-edged sword. And so I just remind our team, I remind our clients that whatever you're doing, whether it's physical, digital, whatever you're putting out there, just realize that once it makes it out online, the chances of it coming back and you having that privacy, there's no guarantee it's ever coming down.
That's what I tell my kids.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome. Really appreciate your time, Jake. As we head out here, any parting thoughts you have, and I guess leave the audience with whatever contact information they may need in order to contact you if they have any other questions or interest.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate you guys having me on today. If I could, I guess, just leave with anything else, it's just we're really passionate about keeping people safe. We're really passionate about providing as holistic as a solution as possible, where let us look at your digital vulnerabilities. Let us look at your physical vulnerabilities. Let us help you come up with a plan so that you have like a real roadmap to a more secure way of life, whether that's personally, organizationally, whatever the case may be. And if you're interested in that and you're just tired of maybe some of these cookie cutter solutions, we'd love to talk. It's fortifiedrisk.com.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Okay. Well, that was a great conversation as we expected. Touched on a lot of high level stuff. I think there's a lot more we could have gotten into. So it's another potential. Maybe we'll bring him on again someday. One thing that we didn't really talk about that Jake mentioned to us off air that I think is worth calling out is that they just recently, his business Fortified Risk Group, ended up on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies. So that experience that he and his co-founder had, bringing that into the civilian world, being able to think like an adversary, and what it takes to harm an adversary is working really well for them, I guess.
Yeah, I think that was something that I'll definitely take away from this conversation, where when they're doing the threat assessment with new clients or their existing clients, they're really thinking about, let's step into the role of somebody who might want to exploit this company. And let's think about it that way, as opposed to, understanding the company's perspective. I'm sure that goes into it, but really thinking about the worst case scenario, which I think is where it ties into the risk management aspect of it. That's what, risk officers are doing every day when they're working with C-level executives, is really thinking about what's the worst case scenario. And obviously, given Jake and I think his co-founder Robin's background, they have definitely a different lens when they're thinking about physical security. So I think it was really interesting to get that mindset of, let's think about it from the viewpoint of the adversary, and then take that and then implement a trust approach for the organization.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway was really how, we all use analogies, or at least I do. I use a lot of analogies. I like to think that's one of my superpowers. The analogies between both the physical and the digital realm that play into here. So, thinking about penetration testing and how would I get myself into a building by taking advantage of some weakness applies in the digital world as well. Even into the privacy versus security perspective, Jake brought the analogy of, if we want to move fast, we're going to be less secure. We're going to wear less gear because obviously wearing a bulletproof vest isn't going to be light. And if you need to move fast, you're not going to want to carry that. You're not going to want to carry as many weapons. I think silence is another variable there, that if you want to move silently, you don't want a bunch of gear bouncing around. While he was telling that story, I thought of another great analogy, which is like your house. Like when it gets to be twilight, we close the curtains in the front of our house because now the lights are going to come on the inside and it's going to be easy to see into the house. I can keep people out of my house with walls and doors and locks and stuff like that. But, and that's security. My privacy is them being able to see in through the window. and being able to see what we're watching on TV or what our habits are within the house at night. And my house becomes more secure by closing those curtains because they don't see what those patterns are. They can't take advantage of that. It's kind of that intelligence gathering aspect of things. So that's a little peek into the paranoia in my head.
No, I think that's a really good way to frame it. And I'm just grateful for Jake's perspective. I think it was actually good for us to shine that light on physical security because I do think, again, as I mentioned in the episode, I think it's actually something that organizations have focused on less given the push to remote work. And I think a lot of organizations are coming back to a hybrid model. And it's definitely something they need to be thinking through, thinking about like, hey, has our threat landscape changed? Do we need to be prioritizing physical security more given we do have people returning to office and we need to think through like, how do we protect them?
And even with the people that are still working remote, one of the things that I think we learned a lot of lessons. I don't know if we kept them long term is how do you protect the organization when people are remote? So the concept of, if my laptop is connecting to my Wi-Fi, then it's exposed to everything that I have on my Wi-Fi. And if I'm not doing a good job of protecting my own Wi-Fi, then I'm now putting the company at risk by the fact that at some point I'm going to connect to the corporate network. And that, like, it's turtles all the way down. Like, should my company care about the physical security of my house? Should they care about whether I put my computer in front of a window where people could peek in through the window and see it? I mean, all these things that we talk about in the corporate environment, this is one of those things where a lot of companies don't want remote workers because that does increase the potential. Now, one could counter and say, as long as you've got good zero trust initiatives going on, it doesn't matter where your people are at. And that's what really matters is and what you should be aiming for. But we all know that that's not as common as it should be.
Yeah. Well, we're really grateful for Jake's time, and I definitely enjoyed socializing with him about all of the topics we covered today.
Yeah. Another great conversation. So we hope everybody enjoyed that as much as we did, which I know we did. And we wish you all well and look forward to interacting with you more going forward. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.